Hi, Michaela.
Hello, Steve.
So today we're going to be answering viewer questions. And the first of those is, how to stop obsessive thoughts about a new partner?
That's a good one. Well, let's say, of course, we have to go, why are the obsessive thoughts about the new partner, and what is actually happening there? But in general, when we meet someone to begin with, right, and it's a new and exciting thing, that typically stirs up a lot of different emotions and also obsessions. And that's pretty normal, I think, to begin with, unless it, of course, takes up all the available bandwidth, and it takes up, more space than it should. So some of the things that happen when people first meet, of course, and this plays into what happens later, which often people ask about. So when people first meet, it's all new and very exciting. And that first very precious moment of realizing that, you like someone, and then you get to know them, and it becomes apparent that it's mutual, and you get together, and then you get to the point where somebody calls them a new partner, meaning something has been established that makes it that the relationship is going somewhere, wherever that is. There's a lot in there that we can unpack. And so the first thing, of course, is that what makes us attracted to people has a lot to do with our previous imprints. And it has to do both with imprints from, let's say, childhood. Some people talk about attachment styles, of course, which is only a very, very small fraction of what plays into when we are attracted to somebody. So there's, let's say, attachment style in the context of we like it when people behave a certain way. That's one aspect. And when I'm saying we like it when people behave a certain way, it's known to us, or it's the reciprocal or sympathetic to what we have going on. So there's that our imprints and relational body mind, and how it kind of links in with somebody else's. That also has to do with how we've seen relationship as in our formative years, let's put it this way, both in the people who raised us, mostly our parents, not true for everyone, but people who raised us, as well as how we were related to by our parents. So those kind of imprints form a really interesting cocktail of information in our body that then makes us attracted to certain people. And that's something that one can explore. There isn't much you can do about it other than bring it to light so you're aware of some of the pitfalls of that, particularly if you've had some not so great relationship imprints. And some of the more common themes here is that love was given in a very conditional way, meaning there was a lot attached to the child having received love, good behavior, or love was only given, or attention was only given when they actually acted out badly or were very unruly, and otherwise they were neglected, or there was a smothering and an over active involvement by a parent, or an inappropriate involvement by a parent. So there's some common themes where we know that as love, but also often we don't want to be loved like that because it was very painful and dysfunctional. And those two things make for a very unpleasant situation, because some part of us goes, typically a very young part of us says, yes, now we're receiving love the way we want it, meaning how we were imprinted. And then the more adult part of us goes, this is abusive or dysfunctional, or I don't want to chase somebody for their attention like I had to chase my parents. So there's a lot in there. We could devote an entire episode just on how that plays out. And then from there, of course, there is our earlier relationship imprints, meaning how we first actually engaged in, let's say, sexual activity as well as relational activity, and our first rejections or breakups or positive experiences that also kind of play a role in the way we connect with a new partner. So that all said, coming back to the question of why am I so obsessed with my new partner, or why have I obsessive thoughts about the new partner? Some of it comes from what I just talked about, which is that sometimes we have patterns of, let's say, abandonment or refusal, or, people often talk about the kind of avoidant or anxious attachment patterns that go typically, hand in hand, where it can be that the new partner in the acute phase of the newness and the excitement displays the kind of behaviors that make people chase, or that make this questioner chase, right? Or that make this questioner anxious about the state of the relationship. So that's one realm of potential to look at. Is that obsessive thought based on lack, fear, anxiety, previous imprints? That's something that has a very specific flavor to it. Another thing that can happen, and that's more in the realm of, let's say, erotic friction or sexual attraction, is that because it's so new and it's so exciting, and it has this really amazing combination of first flush of hormones and bonding and all of those things, and also first flush of sexual excitement and connection, and maybe some exploration that's new or that hasn't happened in a while or never happened. So when that kind of whole, let's say, erotic, adventurous newness gets stirred up, that's quite compelling or obsessive or addictive, not necessarily always in a negative way. It's just, it takes up a lot of space because it's one of those primal aspects of all humans where that kind of erotic engagement is really exciting. And it's particularly very exciting when it's new, and the newness of it and the different flavor of it can be quite, I don't know, can take up a lot of time, let's put it this way. And of course, if that then combines with some previous imprints, it can become obsessive. And that's, not uncommon, I would say. Good news here is that typically wanes. Bad news here is that typically wanes, meaning if you're really obsessed and it's kind of a thing, some of that will go away as the erotic part of the engagement kind of settles in. But of course, often when that happens, it feels like an abandonment, or it feels like something is being taken, and then that can cause obsession. So it's really quite an interesting and very finely sliced engagement when we look at that. And so now what can we do about it? Right. So the first thing is to distinguish what it actually is. Where is the obsession? Is it just the kind of obsession where you sit in the office and you think about last night's date or last night's, erotic encounter, and, you start daydreaming a bit of fantasizing and you can't wait and it's just so exciting. That's one set of obsession that, I don't think there's much that needs to be done about it other than maybe understanding what it is and maybe refocusing the attention on occasion. Where it becomes an issue is if the obsession is based on emotional lack or relational lack, or kind of a more addictive need the sex for the validation, or need the connection because the relationship hasn't settled to a point where somebody knows where they're standing, or it's really something that's a past imprint, even with some triggers or traumatic things. When that's determined, then really the way to look at that is to talk with somebody who can put things a little bit in perspective, can make somebody understand what's what and how do you work with it. And then, of course, another thing that can be looked at is if it's kind of a combination of that just has to do with the relationship being settled or settling in some form, meaning it's not clear what kind of relationship it is. Is it just sex? Is it sex developing into something deeper? Is it something deeper, but it hasn't been described yet or defined yet? Then it might be a good idea to actually have a conversation with the partner on that. And then the last thing I want to say is there is, of course, also the obsession that comes from something not being right. And us knowing that it's not really right, but not wanting it to be wrong. And that cognitive and also kind of body intuitive dissonance can cause some obsession, right? So you think you're in a monogamous relationship with this person, but it doesn't feel like that. Or you think it has a certain depth, but they don't call you or text you on a regular basis. You think it's going one way, but it's going another in all the signs, but not in what's spoken. And there's this push-pull of, where is he or where is she? Why is she not texting? What does this mean? Does this mean something? Oh, they are saying one thing and mean another. That's also one area that can cause some real obsessive situation. And that, of course, also requires kind of a good hard look at what it is, maybe asking some questions, maybe talking with some other people about it who can say, look, these are the obvious signs, right? And then making adjustments around that, which of course is hard when it's exciting and new and has all this wonderful potential.
What are some other signs that one's thoughts, or perhaps obsessive thoughts, should be looked at, or one should pause and reflect on what's going on?
I think the major sign is that it interferes with the rest of, one's life. Let me say that again. So the major sign would be that there's an interference to the way life needs to be lived. So meaning daily activity is eclipsed by those excessive thoughts. Work suffers. Interactions with other people, like one's children or friends or work colleagues, are interrupted by that constant focus on the relationship. A good sign is also that when you have friends and you talk to them about your new relationship, they're starting to kind of glaze over or fuzz out or even roll their eyes or, make the same statement again. That's a good sign that maybe it needs to be looked at. Sometimes people have friends that are nice enough to say, look, you need to stop already. But sometimes they don't. They just kind of start shrinking back. So those are some signs that it probably needs to be examined in a meaningful way. Other things, of course, are when your obsessive thoughts are producing actions that are less than optimal. And things like that. In the olden days, when we didn't have cell phones, right? The classic one was that people would wait home in front of the phone all day and don't go out anymore, or wouldn't go out because the person would call the moment they would, they would leave. So when that kind of behavior, the constant checking of text, the constant checking of phone, the stalking of that person on social media, so to speak, to see where are they, what have they posted, what are they saying, when things like that start happening, the investigating of that person beyond the normal curiosity, thoughts of, kind of doom and gloom around the relationship, and a really excessive need to please that person or to be with that person or do things for that person, both in the, let's say, erotic as well as in the relational domain. Those are all warning signs. And they should at least be examined and maybe checked with some other people who you can trust to give you an honest answer, a therapist, a really good friend who isn't going to lead you down some strange path, a mentor, things of that nature, where you can go, I think this is detracting from my life. And all that, of course, in the context of, it is distracting, and it does make an impact on physical well-being, time management, emotional well-being, mental state, mental health.
One way I think these obsessive thoughts about a new partner or existing partner can show up is in cycles of idealization and devaluation associated with certain types of personality disorders or certain types of trauma coping patterns and so on. I wonder if that's something we ought to discuss.
Yeah, I think it's worth discussing, because we've all been on the giving and receiving end of some version of that, right? And that goes, like you said, from a mild tinge to full-blown it being a proper problem, both, in both domains. And so one of the patterns that go more into, childhood imprints or maladaptive behaviors is that real amazing excitement of meeting somebody new and really, really getting into it. Everything about that person is great. They can't do wrong. They're the most amazing thing. He is the one, or she's the one. Hottest woman I have ever met, most amazing, whatever. Like, there's all these things that like I said, exist in a tinge because of the way we enter relationship. But some people have a tendency to go there very fully, and it's almost magical thinking on one end, and it can also be very disordered, all the way to very disordered on the other end, where a lot of focus is put on that person as bringing value, bringing validation, bringing meaning, bringing almost like the reason for existence in the extreme way. And that, of course, can't last, because it's a commodification of that person for the purpose. Meaning, if this person is who I think they are, then I am validated, or I am now safe, or I am special, or I am now in a different value, construct, or things of that nature. And in the worst case scenario, of course, this is kind of a regression to parental issues, where it's daddy suddenly, or mommy, or or even more painful things from from a very traumatic situation, where that person becomes the idealized savior, or the idealized person who can make all of that okay. And then, of course, because it's the thing that you want and not the person, that person will fall short of the thing, of that validation or construct. And so that then means that first everything's amazing, and that person will give enormous amount of praise. And often people who are struggling with that set of circumstances, they are really, really good at valuing and speaking to the partner's, let's say, own issues around who they are. So they really acknowledge you the way you want to be acknowledged, or they really see things no one else has seen so far. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm really being seen, I'm really being known. Or they give you something that you don't think you can have. So there's kind of a hooking in the most extreme and painful way. It doesn't always have to be that extreme, right? And then, of course, when the moment comes where that person realizes they are not that, the healthy way of disengaging is just to say, well, this is no longer working, or this isn't what I wanted, and then ending the relationship. But of course, sometimes that doesn't happen, because all this entanglement has happened, and the other person has their pattern too. And now it's this horrible dance of devaluating. They first brought out the very, very most amazing things of you, and now they're criticizing the very things that hurt you the most. And they point out what's wrong with you. And now your pattern kicks in and you're trying to make it better or fix it for them or tell them that that's not actually true. And that's where some really codependent and quite horrible relationship patterns can form when that's taken to the extreme. And so that's something to look out for both ways, is that putting up on a pedestal, ripping down, and then in the extreme case, destroying, right, that person emotionally or even, in the world, because they're not giving you the thing that you absolutely have to have. And, the healthy way, of course, is to go, oh, you're not giving me what I want. Is it, on one end, is it realistic that I want that? If I'm saying, yeah, that is realistic that I want that, you are not giving that to me, we need to end the relationship. Bye. It was nice meeting you. But that's typically not how it plays out, of course.
Now we're in the territory of what's sometimes called cluster B or access 2 personality disorders, such as narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, etc. That's the more pathological end that you're beginning to discuss now. Or you're hinting in that direction, it seems.
Yes, that is the pathological end. And of course, that's not where most people live, but some people live there based on a whole set of circumstances. And in that context of, let's say, obsessive thoughts, or somebody having obsessive thoughts about us, there is a huge difference between, let's say, a full-blown personality disorder and traits that can be organized in certain kind of typologies. We all have certain traits that show up when we get very stressed or when our core wounds or core issues are being hit. But that's not the same as having a cluster B or access to full-blown diagnosis. And one of the really good things about, let's say, people giving education on Instagram or stuff like that, is that a lot more people have awareness of the extreme end of what can be, right? There's whole channels dedicated to how do you deal with people who are narcissists or borderlines, right? And that's and I think we haven't had that in the past. And once you understand what the extreme end is, you can go, whoa, that's not acceptable to me. But we also have to make sure that we're clear that not everybody who is a bit self-centered is a full-blown narcissist, or everybody who is a bit obsessive is a full-blown borderline. We all have those traits, and there's a big difference between displaying some behaviors that are maybe less than optimal and being, having a personality disorder. So while I think the education is very important, I also do think we need to always remember we all, when pushed, right, we all, when stressed, devolve into less than perfect behavior, right? That's just the way it goes. And so when we now coming back to, let's say, obsessive thoughts, right? I think we've all been there. And I think for most people that kind of can be dealt with and smoothed out and examined. Where it can go wrong, or where people come also in sessions and say, this is not okay, is when that kind of general tendency flares up, let's say, in a difficult relationship experience, or flares up because they now also got fired from their job, or their parent died, or things like that. And suddenly what was a mild kind of, oh my God, I want to be with you all the time, goes to, where are you? I checked your Instagram. You left your work at 3 and it's 5. Where have you been? You're going to abandon me. You don't love me the way I need to be loved. Like all of that stuff can really, really flare up when there's other stressors involved. That doesn't necessarily mean you're now in bed with a narcissist. It just means it needs to be examined, and some of the stressors need to be brought down. And also some of those behaviors have to be curtailed by the person doing it, actively going and seeking help, by the person experiencing it in actively setting boundaries.
Okay, here's another one. Why the soul of my ex still comes out in my brain after 2 years. It's damn it harsh. Thank you.
Okay. I'm assuming what the questioner is asking is that even after the breakup, that person is still very much present in their mind and heart and potentially body. And that kind of goes with some of the things we just talked about, which is some people leave a very strong imprint for a number of reasons, right? Maybe because they were really the first big love experience, right? The first time somebody's been really in love or really opened their mind, soul, body, right? She's saying soul there, she or he is saying soul there. There's sometimes when we really have that big opening where we really allow somebody in for all wrong or right reasons, right? When we really, really allow somebody in, when they leave, when the relationship is ended by either person, it's really quite a horrible thing. The question says the word harsh. It is a harsh thing because particularly when you've built a relationship with somebody that involves, let's say, living together, having friends together, doing things together, creating memories together, and then, of course, in its extreme form, having children together, business together, property together. When the relationship ends, and that actually means a severing of the relationship, can be really, really brutal because everything we do has now the flavor of the loss of that relationship. And that's very, upsetting, particularly when it has a lot of meaning attached to it. And the meaning can be in a few different domains. It can be in the domain of deepest love relationship, was married, wanted to be together forever, right? Like that kind of depth of engagement where you opened yourself up to somebody very deeply. Can also happen, of course, in the sexual domain, where the erotic imprint of that person was so strong, either because it was a first imprint or it was the best erotic situation, or there was kind of, often our best erotic memories or imprints have a bit of, let's say, darker, more dangerous strains to them, whatever you want to call that, where it's a bit risque, or you open yourself a bit more than you have before, or it's a certain kind of erotic engagement that feels taboo, but within the context of a relationship, it's cool. Or, there was a lot of experimentation. All of that can create a very deep erotic imprint. And often those deep erotic imprints, particularly in the partner who opens their body physically, right? So, meaning in whatever erotic engagement, there's typically one partner. Not always, but there's one partner who kind of also opens their body, and the other partner who kind of enters into that domain in some way, as a general play of, the erotic. So typically the partner who opens has a very deep imprint of having opened and having let that in. And of course, physically speaking, there's all kinds of research now that also has, physical implications, but just because the question was about the soul, that imprint sometimes can be really, really deep. And often you'll see that people replace the imprint of their ex with somebody else so that they can move on, right? That's where the whole rebound relationship comes from, or the rebound sex comes from. And often people also don't leave their partners till they have a replacement, or they have a fling or something like that, that kind of redoes that imprint in the body, mind, soul sense. And that's often done, and sometimes that works great, and sometimes it doesn't, because it doesn't scratch the itch of that depth or that imprint. And of course, the deepest imprint is what we're living with, so to speak. And that sometimes people describe it as like it's it's like a whole that is shaped as that person, or it's a whole that's shaped as that activity that was so deeply imprinting. And so to the question of that was posed there on Instagram, the help part, how do you deal with that, is it is sometimes useful to replace the imprint with somebody else, and that's what most people do, and there's nothing innately wrong with that. The problem is just when they leave, you have to do it again and again and again. And sometimes it's just good to know that one can replace an imprint, and that's enough for people to go, oh, okay, I do need to go out and kind of re-imprint myself or reopen myself to a different experience that makes this less painful. That's, of course, an easier way to deal with it. There's also another way to deal with it, which requires a little bit more attention and practice and wherewithal. But I talk about that in the Wild Women's Way intensives often, where people come with that question specifically of how do I get out of attracting a certain kind of a partner, and how do I re-imprint my system, and how do I get a deep sexual imprint out. And if you want to do that, it requires a bit of work, but it is doable. And one of the ways to do it is to make the imprint a non-specific, like a non-human imprint that can be done by imprinting towards nature. It can be done by imprinting towards, let's say, a God image, whatever that means. It means a different thing to different people, right? Like a universal, beneficial imprint that's so much bigger and so much vaster and so much more open, and hence also not fraught with the relational difficulty that you can imprint with. And the way you can do it specifically is through pleasure practice, meaning through bringing the body into pleasure, and then opening the heart and the orientation towards something that's not specific to one person. Because also the problem that's somewhat alluded to in that question is that often the person who opens themselves, their whole sexual orientation, including their fantasies, is connected to that deepest imprint. And that's really rough. And that is really harsh when you've had such an amazing sexual connection and imprint, and now that person is gone, but your fantasy life, including self-pleasure, makes you always go back there. And then as you go back there, it really hurts because the loss kicks in. And so your erotic fantasy life, your self-pleasure life, is completely destroyed by thinking about that person and then feeling the pain of that loss, which often then diminishes the pleasure a lot, right? Or you can't even go certain places. And if you go there, then it hurts. So you're in this really odd situation, which can be quite destructive and harmful and bad. And so the way out of that is to direct the pleasure to a non-human form, so to speak. And so to train the body through pleasure practice to have fantasies, so to speak, or orientations that are not specific to a partner. And that takes a bit of work, and it takes a bit of practice, because we tend to want to go there. But when you can do that, it really frees you from that kind of ouch, harsh pain thing. And even if you have a partner currently with whom you have that, to widen that imprint into, let's say, nature and whatever universal, benevolent quality you want to connect with, also kind of reduces some of what we just talked about, the obsession or the obsessive thinking or the needing it from a person that way. So in closing to your question, I think having a good, sufficient, independent self-pleasure practice that's more a spiritual, that has more of a spiritual, however people understand that, connection and the spiritual opening to life flow, opening to nature, opening to something much vaster than a mere human, right? Really allows for us to be less contracted and craven and pained and attached and obsessed to the erotic partner of choice.
Michaela, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.